Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwyn Robinson, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. And we are carrying on our practitioner series. So today's episode is part 4 of our deficiencies step within the Rejuvenate Blueprint. So please, if you haven't checked out any of those episodes, the links will be in the description below. I highly recommend it. We're looking at it from a point of view as a practitioner would speak to their client, but there's so much information in there, especially for those of you listeners, and I know you're there, who really like to dive deeper into what things are, how they work, and figuring everything out. Please, please, please do not miss these episodes. So today we are looking at essentially how can someone that is vegetarian or vegan make sure that they are really meeting their nutritional needs. Our previous one was really looking at it from a point of view of just anyone in particular, but now we're focusing directly on vegans and vegetarians mainly. So I know, Elwyn, I've talked to you about this because my daughter's a vegetarian and I've been very concerned or worried to make sure that she's actually getting all of her macros and her micros that she is. So what would you say, or where would you say is the first step for someone to begin looking at to make sure that they're getting what they need?
Well, yeah, good question. So before I get into that, I want to address the responses I can just hear from some people. So first of all, obviously, if you are, a meat eater, oh, let's put it the other way. If you're a vegetarian or vegan, you're probably not watching my podcast anymore. I used to have a big following of vegan people, but you might be. So let me just address the potential arguments, the potential disagreements that might come up right at the outset. So first of all, whenever you're restricting your diet to any degree, nutritional deficiencies are more likely. We could, and maybe if there's demand for it, we will do an episode at some point about the nutrients that you're more likely to be deficient in if you're a carnivore. And there would also be a list there, right? It's a different list, but it is a list nonetheless. So first of all, please don't feel like you're being persecuted. And that Chrissy's coming from like a 1950s kind of perspective of, oh my God, what if you don't eat, you're immediately going to die. It's not that. It's actually because Chrissy is well informed in the nutrition world, and she knows what I just said, right? Whenever you're restricting your diet, the nutritional deficiencies are always more likely. That's the first thing. Second thing, for anyone who doesn't really know me that well, who hasn't known me for a long time, you may not know this about me. For the first 4 years of my life, I was vegan. Between 0 and 4, I was vegan. Then between 4 and about 27, I was vegetarian. And then between 27 and 35, I was vegan again. So, and I'm now 44 at the time of filming this. So this is not coming from a place of a meat eater talking down to vegetarians or vegans who hasn't given it a proper go. I guess that's the point that I want to make. I also want to let you know that although I've changed my mind about a lot of things over the years, I've been very consistent with this. Back when I first started my health, quote unquote career for my normal job, I was a raw vegan at the time. I did that for 3 years. And my first ever published article in a published magazine was in that raw vegan magazine, telling them that they were at a high risk for zinc deficiency and that they should supplement zinc, which they were not a fan of. So I just want to let you know, even when I was 100% identified with this, and when I did these diets that I just said, when I say I was a vegetarian or whatever, like, I don't mean I was eating a little bit of fish, a little bit of chicken. Like, I mean, zero. I did not eat any animal flesh until I was 35 years old. And even then, it was more like fish until I was 40, the vast majority of it. So I have given it a proper go. And I can say that, yes, like the scaremongering about how you're just going to drop dead if you don't eat meat for a day is not true. But I will also say that I do think some of the health challenges that I later developed were due to eating the diet with this particular restriction and developing certain nutrient deficiencies. Now, were those nutrient deficiencies inevitable? Could I have avoided them? That is the $1 million question if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, and that's what I want to address today. Yeah, I think that in this day and age, um, it is possible to have a better nutritional intake than most people, including most people who eat animal foods, as a vegetarian or vegan. It is possible, but it absolutely does require more supplementation. Um, and so that's before we get into individual nutrients, which I know I'm going to do most of the time, Chrissy, to answer your initial question. That's my first concern with vegetarianism and veganism. And it's something that I don't think we're going to do a demonstration of this today, but we've done a few demos recently where I show that overall, and again, this is a generalization, but animal sources of protein generally come with more nutrition than vegetarian and vegan sources of protein. There are some exceptions like dairy. Um, it really doesn't come with that many nutrients except for very high levels of a few nutrients and a good selection of amino acids. Um, but certainly meat, especially red meat, ruminant animals, land meat, animals that eat mainly grass, are very nutrient dense. And then some seafood, especially certain shellfish and generally oily fish like salmon, are very nutrient dense. Um, and then maybe, like pork is in the middle and chicken's a little bit less nutritious and eggs are a little bit less if you include the white. And so, it's a spectrum when it comes to animal foods. But with the exception of maybe dairy, all plant sources of protein are inferior when it comes to the level of micronutrients that they contain with them compared to animal foods. So even before we get into all the specific nutrients, which is what we'll spend most of the time doing, just realize if you're eating a vegetarian diet, if you're eating any diet, so let's actually start with this. It's difficult to get even 100% of the government recommended daily intake from your food. The less you eat because you're trying to diet, because you're trying to lose weight, whatever, the more difficult it is because then you're going to have even more of the nutrients come with the less calories that you're now eating. The more you have digestive issues, the more difficult it is because your body is not maybe able to handle as much food, or more commonly, it's not able to break down the food well enough and bring it in. So for anyone, an omnivore, someone who's willing to eat anything, even for that person, it's fairly challenging meeting all your nutritional needs from the diet. Um, and I don't believe, and this is hard to know for sure, but I don't believe this is a new situation. I think that our ancestors throughout the ages have always had this challenge. And so, different tribes and different locations, they developed all kinds of often very complex and time consuming behaviors to, for instance, if we are talking about plant foods, to soak them, ferment them, like break them down so that the nutrients are more available. And then, with animal foods, the same to some degree. Like there's always been a lot of work gone into by our ancestors to try and get enough nutrients from our food. So that's always been the case. In this day and age, it should be easier because we can get food throughout the world. Very few of us.
You would think it would be easier, but it's not always the case, is it?
Yeah, yeah. Be, very few of us actually have to struggle to be able to afford food these days, so long as we're not picky, at least, in most countries. But there is definitely an issue where, because of the modern industrial farming practices been going on for the last 200 years or so, um, there is less nutrition in in the plant food than there used to be, and this affects you even if you're a carnivore because the animals are eating the plants and then you're eating the animals, so still there's less nutrition, which is partly why the wild oily fish that often are in the away from humans, that are eating still kind of natural diet in the sea, and kind of why the animals that eat grass, which not huge amount has been done to deplete the grass of nutrition, are better off, and so do have better nutrition than most other foods in terms of the density of micronutrients per calorie or per unit of digestion required in order to digest them. So it's always a challenge for everyone, but it is in many ways more of a challenge for vegans and vegetarians, especially vegans, for a couple of reasons. First of all, what I just said, that the protein sources are lower in micronutrients from most plant sources than most animal sources. And then second of all, that there are specific nutrients which are either very difficult to get enough of from purely plant sources, like vitamin B12. We'll talk about that first. That's probably the most well-known one. But second of all, there might be things that actually a lot of people are struggling to get enough of, but it is actually more difficult overall if you are on a plant-based diet. Like magnesium would be a version of that, or perhaps choline. So we'll talk about all of those. I'll talk about the things that you almost certainly have to supplement, like vitamin B12, if you want to be 100% plant-based, versus, some of the things that you want to have an eye on, maybe in general, but you especially want to have an eye on if you're a vegetarian and vegan.
Right. Okay. I mean, going back to the previous episode when we were really looking at chronometer, and you were showing as well, especially for the, nutrients in a carnivore diet, that, as I said in that episode, it's very eye-opening. And so looking at it from this point of view as well, I mean, there's just a lot more as you were saying, there's those animal meats are just much more nutritionally dense when we look at it as in the bulk against it in comparison. But like you were saying at the beginning, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. I mean, like, everybody has their option, their choice. What this is really about is staying informed and understanding where the pitfalls may lie in that regard, so that you do not end up with a nutritional deficiency, because as we've noted, and that's why it's one of your steps in the Rejuvenate blueprint.
Yes, absolutely. Nutrition. I am still often surprised at how big a difference deficiencies make in people's health and well-being. And so this is very important. And as you said, we've just done a whole series about it. So if you need an introduction to that concept, check that out. We're going to kind of dive straight into it and talk about the things that are most relevant if you're a vegetarian or vegan.
Perfect. So, I mean, you have your list. Do you want to kick it off with vitamin B12?
Yes, vitamin B12. I have actually seen a case of a deficiency of this. I don't see many because, again, as I said, I haven't had many vegetarian, vegan clients for a while, but I did see one last year where the person was not to the point where it's life-threateningly low, but significantly low, who had been following not even a purely vegetarian diet, but more like a plant-based diet where it was largely vegetarian and, avoiding all red meat, and I believe avoiding fish as well. And so, honestly, vitamin B12 deficiency is a concern, again, even for people who eat meat. This is something that's potentially a problem for anyone. The reason why it's so concerning is the B vitamins are essential for a million things, but just to give a couple of highlights, which hopefully will be memorable. So one of them is that they're essential for transporting oxygen through the red blood cells. So basically, a lack of B12 can lead to a specific type of anemia. Anemia is, pale, weak, low energy, cold, all of that kind of stuff. It's not good. We talk a ton about mitochondrial energy and stuff like that in these episodes over and over and over again, and we talk about all the more advanced elements of it. But one of the most basic elements is just getting enough oxygen to the cells to create energy, and so a lack of vitamin B12 will do that. Vitamin B12 is essential for the health of the nervous system. That's the other one that I'd really focus on. And usually, when a person is deficient in B12, it's nervous system impairments that will actually show up first, more commonly than micro or macrocytic anemia, which is the type of anemia that B12 tends to lead to. And nervous system problems can show up in all kinds of ways, but it could be, it could be things like fatigue, but it could be things like memory loss, lack of focus, but it could also be things like neuropathy, so where you get numbness and tingling, or pain for no reason. It could be hallucinations, it could be delusions, it could be psychosis, it could be all of those kind of things. It's really serious. If you ask a lot of people what they actually find even more scary than dying, and it's kind of going insane. And I'm not saying obviously B12 deficiency will do that overnight, but like emotional dysregulation is not usually listed, like if you were to just Google it, but I see it as one of the early symptoms of B12 deficiency. And the person who had the B12 deficiency who came to me, actually, emotional dysregulation was one of their challenges why they came to me in the first place, despite doing everything right, eating this healthy plant-based diet and doing meditation, doing this and doing that. And they were find it extremely difficult to regulate their emotions. And I definitely believe that B12 plays a part in that. The other reason why B12 is so important and it's such a big deal that even mainstream medical doctors do fairly often test for it, certainly if you tell them that you're vegetarian or vegan, other than the anemia, which is one of the reasons that they're focused on it, is because once you become deficient in it, beyond a certain point, it is actually impossible to replenish it. And then there's just this gradual degradation of the nervous system, which is extremely unpleasant. This is relatively rare because it is tested for routinely, even by normal mainstream medical doctors. But it is a concern for that reason. So with most deficiencies, like it might, they're all quite rare in terms of what doctors recognize anyway. I'd say they're more common than doctors are aware of, but whatever, they're reasonably rare. Um, but like even if you're in ICU because of a nutritional deficiency, generally just give the person a nutrient and they get better. It's pretty, miraculous how easy it is to fix. Not the case of vitamin B12. That's the point.
I was going to
5 years.
ask, I was sorry to interrupt. I was going to ask, why do you think that person, once they're so deficient that they cannot come back from it?
I don't know. I think that's a human biology thing. I don't have the answer to. I don't know if it is known, but I just know that 5 years before it gets to the point where you might end up in an emergency room, it already can be too late to replenish those stores. There's something about the way that it works, and so that's why it's something that they do monitor. Just like with heart disease, they say it's the silent killer. Like you're like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, and then you drop dead. So it's important to test to make sure that you're not close to dropping dead without realizing. So it's the same with B12. Like a lot of the nervous system issues are considered, normal-ish up until a certain point, or they're considered to be in the psychiatric category rather than the physical health category. So yeah, vitamin B12 deficiency, big deal. It's such a big deal that I see even some militant kind of vegan influencers and stuff do talk about it and how you should get a B12 shot and stuff like that. So I would say if you're a vegetarian or vegan, it's definitely worth testing for. As I said, testing is not that uncommon, and so it's reasonably cheap. Your doctor might just do it anyway for you, but even if they don't, you can do it yourself. And my advice would be to get it to the top end of the range in general, and especially if you're don't be like satisfied because it's like okay, because there is also a thing that just because it's in your blood doesn't necessarily mean it's getting to the cells. And so, anecdotally, I know a lot of people, including vegetarians and vegans, but not necessarily only, even when their blood test levels are quote unquote normal, if they take high doses of B12, they suddenly start feeling better. Like, oh, my fatigue is gone. Oh, my I'm able to sleep better, or whatever it may be. Like it makes a big difference anyway. And so there is a more sensitive test called methylmalonic acid, which is one of the many, many markers in the NutrEval that we often talk about. So that's a more sensitive way. So that's not testing B12. But if that's elevated, that's a sign that you have low B12. Another sign that you have low B12 and a marker that's maybe a little bit more easily available would be homocysteine that we've talked about before. Although homocysteine is kind of low level of potentially a few nutrients, like also B6 and folate. But yeah.
Right. Okay. So then, that's a big one. That is a really big one because I think that's probably the only vitamin that I've heard of that has such detrimental effects if it's so deficient.
There's a horrific effect to all of them if you are so deficient. The distinction with this is how difficult it is to fix once it gets to that point. With all of them, scurvy and rickets and beriberi, and most of them have the severe deficiency diseases related to them. But almost universally, if you just give the person high enough levels, maybe even IV infusion, they will start to feel better pretty quickly. The challenge with B12 is that you can get to the point where that doesn't work.
Okay, pretty serious. So what the takeaway is here is test for it. Test for it and make sure that you are supplementing anyway, because no matter what, vegans and vegetarians aren't able to get it from their diet. They must supplement. Is that right?
So some of them would even dispute this. So B12, actually, let me address the test thing first, and then remind me to go back to that. So I'm always a big fan of testing. Some people hate it. The truth is, B12 is one of those nutrients that you really can't overdo very easily. Um, and you'll see a lot of the supplements are sold. They're like 10,000% of the recommended daily ounce. Totally fine. Like, so B12 is water soluble. A lot of people really struggle to absorb it even. Sometimes they're missing this thing in their stomach, which there's a genetic component to. Um, so there's like getting it from your mouth to your digestive tract, getting it from your digestive tract into the bloodstream, getting it from the bloodstream to the cells. That's like the simplified version. All of those need to work well. B12 can fail at each of those points. And so taking really large doses daily tends to be safe compared to almost anything else, compared to most foods. I mean, nothing is 100% safe. There's always someone who has some problem. But like I've been to the doctor and had my B12 be like so elevated that it's like beyond their reference range. And then they're like, have you been taking a B12 supplement? Yes. Oh, okay. That explains it. Done. There's like no issue with it. Yeah. So, and what was the other thing?
Well, that essentially that somebody that is vegan and vegetarian should supplement no matter what. Is that true?
Yes. So, all right. So B12 is technically not found in not the product of animals or plants. It is a product of fermentation. So it actually comes from bacteria. It's bacteria who produce it. Some people say that some plant foods, like say spirulina, have B12 in, although this is a bit contentious. Like some batches do, some batches don't. And I think this is down to maybe the issue that it is a fermentation thing again. So maybe if the spirulina ferments in a certain way, maybe it has it, maybe sometimes it doesn't, whatever. But it's a lot more dicey whether it's ever in plant foods. I think like sauerkraut, for instance, that's like a classic fermented vegetable. Again, it could have it, but it could also not have it. So it's much more reliably in animal foods. So yeah, the purist may say, well, you could get it from plant foods. As I said, technically true, but unreliable, which is why I would still supplement.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. Well, great. So it's a product of fermentation. So essentially, what I'm understanding too is that when the animals eat, then their bacteria are acting upon it and producing the B12 from something within.
Um, I mean, I think it's more that the bacteria that create B12 settle on animal products, right? So it's a dead animal a lot of the time, or maybe it's you know the milk. Potentially, yeah, the bacteria in the milk may be producing it. But yeah, not necessarily. It's more just that I think it's more just that the bacteria that create it are more likely to, because different bacteria like to feed on different things, and they seem to prefer to feed on animal products. That's my understanding.
Okay, great. Okay. So something definitely worth testing because if you are deficient in it, well, you don't want to go down that road. Okay. Beautiful. So what is next on our nutrient list for vegans, vegetarians?
So I put a couple together here. I'll talk about together: iron and zinc. So I mentioned zinc before. How my first ever published article was about the vegans' need for zinc. So both genders can definitely end up deficient in both in general. So even if you eat meat, just like I said about B12, but it is more common if you're vegetarian or vegan. It doesn't really matter in this case. And I want to some of them, vegan makes much more of a difference than others. And this one, basically, in either case, it doesn't make much of a difference. Um, and so men, especially, tend to have more of an issue with and become more depleted in zinc, and women especially tend to get more depleted in and have more of an issue of iron, but both can suffer with both.
And I think a very, very good point here in referring back to genetics is there could be a genetic tendency or predisposition to deficiencies in these, correct?
100%, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, that's true for B12 as well. It's true for every single nutrient I'm going to cover today. There'll be a report about it in Genetic Insights about whether you have a genetic tendency to have it lower. And absolutely right, that's another factor that, because you might say, well, this person's vegan and they didn't have a deficiency, so, why should I? And there could be all kinds of answers to that, of course, but one of them that can be very significant, as you say, Chrissy, is genetics. Yes.
Okay. And people want to pay attention to iron and zinc. Why?
So everything I said about B12 in terms of anemia applies to iron, right? So iron's that essential thing for transporting the oxygen. It's certainly not the only thing that it does, um, but generally that's how we look at it. Just to simplify things, anemia is usually the first thing that they're going to be focused on with low iron. Another one that I'm focused on is thyroid function. So you need iron in order to get enough active thyroid hormone into the cells. But yeah, usually it's a focus on, because it creates anemia. What is anemia? Lack of oxygen going to the cells. What does that mean? Lack of energy being produced by the mitochondria, which means everything could go wrong, right? So it is a big deal. And again, iron, like vitamin B12, is one of the only nutrients that normal mainstream doctors will actually test you for, because it is so important, because it is so crucial. Now, zinc is an interesting one. I didn't tell you about this actually, Chrissy, but I've arranged for a interview. Hopefully, it will happen. Otherwise, we might edit this out. With someone who believes that zinc deficiency is almost universal, and that replenishing our stores of zinc will kind of resolve every health problem. Now, he's actually not the only one. I'm interviewing him because I'm interested in this protocol, but there are a bunch of people who feel that way, that most of our health problems actually come down to zinc deficiency. Now, there's obviously a bunch of people out there with different opinions. I've heard the same thing about iodine, how iodine deficiency causes everything. I've heard the same thing about copper, how copper deficiency. I've heard the same thing about magnesium, how magnesium deficiency. So, there's a few nutrients, and even though when you become obsessed with one nutrient, you tend to overstate its value. I think in the case of some of them, and magnesium and zinc would be on the top of my list, it's easy to start to fall into that belief because they are so important. It's actually hard to define what they do because they kind of do everything. Um, but some of the most common reasons that people like to focus on zinc are for the immune system. That would be one. We've talked about how important the immune system is before, in terms of out of the top 10 things that kill people, the vast majority are directly caused by problems with immune function, and the rest are indirectly caused by problems with immune function. zinc is this crucial factor for immune function, so that's huge. Zinc is crucial for hormones, especially for men. Levels of testosterone and even DHT and other stuff that we talked about, all very dependent on zinc and can easily be improved by adding zinc in many cases. But for reproduction in general, for men and women, it's really, really, really crucial for the integrity and function of our DNA. There's so many things I could go on and on. Like as an anti-aging thing, it's really big. There's so many things that are potentially great about zinc, and so the challenge is, so with iron, that there is plenty of iron in plant foods, but generally it's not well absorbed and usable, especially for some people.
And why is
And the
that?
genetics play a role in that again. Um, so there's this form of iron called heme iron, which is the form of iron that is found in blood. Um, that for some people more than others, as I understand it, genetics is one of the big factors with it, is much more easily utilizable by the body. And some people do okay with other forms of iron, but some people don't. I remember back when I was a vegan and telling everyone that it could work as long as you supplemented, and having this lovely woman explained to me in detail how she really, really tried it. She was so convinced she didn't want to do it because of animal cruelty, and she didn't want to eat meat because of animal cruelty. And she tried the supplement, she tried this, she ended up in hospital with severe levels of anemia. She was going to die, and they told her the only way that she would be able, and I think, I mean, there's some kind of IV something that they gave her, but they said in order to keep coming back here, you're going to have to start eating heme iron. And as soon as she did, everything was better and she's transformed and all the rest of it. Now, that's an anecdote. I know there's other anecdotes of people who are just fine with plant-based iron. So I'm not saying it's universal, but I'm saying, and there's obviously, this is just something that happened to me very early in my career, but obviously there's plenty of evidence for it. Some people really need that heme iron. The other problem is, so some people are okay with the plant-based iron or even the synthetic supplemental iron. Um, but the problem is all iron feeds bacteria in the gut. And so the less easily absorbed it is, the more problems you're going to have with it feeding bacteria that you don't want to feed. And so it's problematic in that way as well. And that's why a lot of people and people in the repeat community, focus on this and talk about this a lot, but it's not the only one. There's a bunch of people out there, again, who believe that actually too much iron is the thing that causes us to age, that it's like the number one root cause health problem, that it's because iron kind of acts like a free radical. It's very destructive to everything that comes across its path. So if it stays in the digestive tract, it feeds a bad bacteria. If it does manage to get into the bloodstream and then get distributed, if it's excessive, then it has this damaging impact on everything it touches. It kind of rusts the body's systems. Um, so that can happen with excess heme iron just as much. Sorry, just to clarify that. But basically, sorry, that's what I was going to say is, with the if you supplement iron, then it's more likely to feed the bad bacteria. But if your body is able to absorb it, then okay, that's good. Then you've got enough iron. But if you're supplementing, you might be easily supplementing too much iron, which then means it potentially goes to the other side of the bad potential impact, which again can also happen with meat, but it's just with supplementation, it's easier to overdo it than by eating food generally. That's all. So usually I say it's fine to supplement. Iron's probably, just looking at my list here, it's like the only exception where actually calcium's also not great to supplement either, but it's certainly a lot better than iron. We'll talk about calcium in a bit. So iron is the most problematic to supplement. And it's a shame because it's usually women who want to be vegetarian and vegan. It's actually women usually in their childbearing years. There's not usually many 70-year-old women who are converting to veganism for the first time. And nor is it, usually women before that time either. So it's unfortunate that it's women just when they're most likely to become deficient in iron will then go to this diet which is low iron, and um, if they supplement iron, maybe the body doesn't absorb it very well, then it can create dysbiosis. If the body does absorb it very well, then okay, that could be fine, but then they could also easily be overdoing it. So it's a whole thing. It's potentially a challenge. And so there's no easy answers with this one. I would say, some tips would be if you are not super, super strict with it, like if you just don't want any meat on your plate, but you're all right to have it in a capsule, then having something like I recommended to you, which is like a spleen extract that had real heme iron in it, Chrissy, that's like an easy way of getting good quality iron that your body can, really utilize. If you do have to supplement with the less ideal versions like ferrous gluconate or whatever, then I would recommend having it along with something like lactoferrin, which first of all, to some degree prevents bad bacteria consuming the iron, and then second of all can help with the absorption of the iron. And then also, there are other things like having vitamin C. So this is where, because there is iron in plants, as I said, there's challenge you if it is there. So if you have vitamin C or vitamin C containing foods with the iron or iron containing foods, then that does help with the absorption of that iron. So there's certain things you can do to improve the situation with plant foods. So, and I would do all of them. I would take something like lactoferrin to reduce the amount that it's being eaten by the bad bacteria, and I would um, supplement with it. Probably, I mean, test for it. Test to make sure that you actually need the iron. But if you're a woman who's menstruating, you're unlikely to have an excess amount. It's very unusual. So in that case, you could probably supplement a small amount as a vegetarian just to be safe if you really are against testing. Zinc is easier in one sense because zinc supplements work just fine to raise your zinc levels, so that's good. Um, the highest plant sources of zinc don't have much zinc. I think pumpkin seeds is the highest of all, and you'd have to eat so much pumpkin seeds every day to just hit the recommended daily allowance of zinc, let alone maybe what's more of an optimal level of zinc. So it's hard to get enough zinc from a diet, full stop. I think this is one of the reasons why people, not everyone of course, but some people do feel better when they start eating a pound or two of red meat a day. Um, there's several reasons for it, but one thing could be the zinc. It's funny, there's such an obsession with protein, and 90, if you are one of those vegetarians or vegans listening to this who can empathize more with your daughter than you, Chrissy, of like, oh, I wish these people would stop telling me I need. Usually what these people say is you need to eat more protein, you need to eat protein. And there's nothing more annoying to a vegetarian or vegan because usually they're quite informed and they know full well that there is plenty of protein from plant foods. And they are correct. There is plenty of protein. There are certain amino acids which are lower, which we're going to talk about, but you can easily get enough protein from plant foods. I do not doubt that for a second. The
I've got a quick
problem.
question. I was going to say, or maybe your problem is going to be my question.
Okay, go ahead, ask.
Yeah, I was going to say, because my question there would be, but with that protein, it comes with carbohydrate. So, and especially if somebody is potentially not wanting that carbohydrate or needing to stay away from it for, insulin spikes or other things, or, how would somebody get around that?
The protein doesn't necessarily come with carbohydrate. Nuts and seeds, especially seeds, are full of protein and there's pretty much no carbohydrate. So that would be the easy answer that a vegetarian would give you about that one. Um, and
Yeah, but I mean, you can't eat that in massive quantities to try and like limit your carb intake.
well, you can. I
Well, you
mean,
can, but I'm not saying don't know if you
I mean,
want to.
but that's a ketogenic diet, right? Ketogenic diet is moderately high protein-ish, high fat, and that's where you get your calories. I mean, that's absolutely doable. You can absolutely do a ketogenic diet, plant-based. Would you want to is a different question. I know what you mean though, Chrissy. I think what you're getting at is it's very hard to get protein from plant sources that don't come with a load of other calories from either fat or
Yes.
carbohydrates, right?
Yes.
Which is accurate. The only way you can get high protein without larger amounts of carbohydrate and fat is through an extract, like a protein powder, like a rice protein powder. But there are no natural plant foods that are high in only protein, like there are natural animal foods that are high in only protein. Like a very lean steak, or some of the shellfish that we talked about, or the non-fatty fish. They are, over 90% of calories can often come from protein. That never ever happens in the plant kingdom. So that is absolutely correct. Yeah. What I was going to say is the problem, you can absolutely get enough protein from a vegan and vegetarian diet. The problem is that it's the nutrients that come with it that are lacking, like the ones that we're talking about here. And certain amino acids are also lacking, like we're going to discuss. So I would recommend to anyone who does have a client, patient, son, daughter, husband, wife, whatever, who is vegetarian, vegan, stop telling them that they're not getting enough protein. They probably are. Start telling them that they're not getting enough vitamin B12, probably iron, zinc, and all the rest of what we're talking about here. Because when you say protein, it actually diminishes your authority and position to give them advice, because you're wrong. So as soon as you start giving advice and you're wrong, then even if you're like, well, by protein I mean something else, well, someone who's very fixed on a certain diet, they're not going to give you any leeway in that regard. You've got to be accurate in what you actually say to them, right? So if you can say 60% of people who eat a plant-based diet are deficient in vitamin B12, that's very specific, rather than I'm worried you're not getting enough protein. First of all, it's not specific, but second of all, it's not even valid, right? They probably are getting enough-ish. They might not be getting enough to put on a load of muscle or something, but they're almost certainly getting enough to do basic functions. It's not the protein that's the problem, especially if they're a vegetarian, not a vegan, right? Because there's very complete amino acid profile in eggs. There's very complete amino acid profile in dairy. So other than a couple of exceptions, which we're going to talk about, so it really is more the micronutrients. That's the problem. Like B12, number one, iron, zinc. So back to zinc, you can get enough from supplementation, and it's not as dangerous to overdo it as it is with iron. And so that's why I would say if you are vegetarian or vegan, especially if you're a woman, maybe supplement 10, 15 milligrams a day, maybe more, but at least that. If you're a man, maybe 15 to 20, and then you're fine, probably. That's like a really, unlike, just like with vitamin B12, that's a really easy one to resolve. Make sure you have it with a meal, because zinc can make you feel nauseous if you have it on its own. And you're probably going to be fine. That's an amount that you're probably never going to have too much if you just have that much every day. Obviously, it's ideal to test and see if you do need even more than that. I have one client right now who wasn't even on a vegetarian diet. They were just more on a low calorie-ish diet, and so probably not having enough nutrients in general. And they were on 50 milligrams of zinc for months, and they get the test results back, and they're still severely deficient in zinc. So some people do need a lot of zinc, and it's things like that that made me interested to do the interview, which I don't know when it'll come out. Maybe it already has. We'll see. But about zinc replenishment, right? Strategies for that, because it's not always simple. But yeah, just basic thing, 15-ish milligrams a day, and you should at least not have a severe deficiency in most cases as a plant eater.
Okay. And you brought up a very, very valid point. Always take your zinc with food. It's terrible. I've made that mistake before a couple of times. And then, oh God, I had the zinc without eating something. It's yeah, not great.
15 milligrams might be okay. Like they often come in 50, and that will make a lot of people sick. Okay, next one would be iodine, or iodine, I think my American friends call it. So iodine, we've talked about this. I do feel like people actually can overdo it with iodine easily if they supplement. So I'm not a fan of doing high dose iodine supplements in general. However, iodine is usually found in fish, sea vegetables, and dairy. They would be the top sources. So especially if you're vegan, and in that order. Although sea vegetables could sometimes be higher. Let's say fish and sea vegetables are top. Dairy has enough that if you have a lot of dairy every day, even if you don't have any seafood, you'll still have enough iodine. Um, but anyway, those are like the top sources. So if you're not having any of that, which is easy as a vegan, certainly, and maybe as a vegetarian, if like you have a dairy intolerance or whatever, then you can easily end up with too low iodine. So I would not go crazy with supplement iodine. Almost every iodine supplement out there in the market, I feel, is actually overdosed. It's one of the few things that I would probably want to have just like 100% of the recommended daily intake or allowance of, or maybe 200%, but no more. So almost every supplement out there is overdosed to my mind in terms of like pure iodine supplements. Often, if you're taking like a multi or something, then the amount in there is not too bad. But iodine is super super important for thyroid function. Your thyroid hormone is made out of basically tyrosine, which is an amino acid, and iodine. But it's super important for a bunch of other stuff as well. There's as I said, there's a whole movement out there of people who believe that if you just take enough iodine, all your problems are resolved. There's also a whole movement out there of people who've tried that high dose iodine and become very sick as a result. So I would be a little bit careful with that. But yeah, there is a huge amount of functions that it does. It's not an easy one to test as well, to get tested. So I would say if you're vegetarian and vegan and you don't want to take endo supplements, which I completely understand, start eating sea vegetables. That's the easy solution. Start, wakame, nori wraps, stuff like that. Dulse and avocado. I remember that's a combination that's quite good. Um, Kelp is super high in iodine. You only need to put a very small piece of it, like add it to something like your rice when you cook it or something, and it you know produces a lot, gives you a lot of iodine. So it's quite easy to get enough just from plants if you want to do that, but make sure to actually eat sea vegetables on a regular basis. If you really don't want to do that, then as I said, really low dose supplements would be the way I would go.
With sea vegetables, because I know that they're quite salty, would there be any point where somebody might want to watch it because of the sodium intake?
Um, I mean, it's very niche cases, maybe of kidney disease or something like that. But they are salty. But remember, I'd be more worried about someone overdoing the iodine if they're eating loads of sea vegetables, as opposed to overdoing the sodium. So, yeah, this is what I'm saying. Like with the nori wraps, like they're only 2 grams, so you could have several of those a day without any concern. They're not that salty. They're not that high in iodine. But if you are having something like kelp or something like that, it is so high in iodine. That's why I said I just add a little piece. I wouldn't have a lot of it. There's what else? There's arame, which is kind of like a flat pasta in the way it looks and in the way it tastes. Um, there's like seaweed salad where you have a whole thing that's mainly seaweed, and I used to do that. I would not recommend that anymore. I overdid it with iodine. I would say just a little bit regularly, several times a week, will actually help you meet your intake. And if you're doing that, there's no way that sodium will ever be a problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you for answering that. So, moving on to our next nutrient for our vegans and vegetarians, what is it?
Yeah, so I've got two more categories here, Chrissy. So my next category are well-known nutrients, which really anyone could be deficient in, but it is more likely in vegetarians and vegans. So I've got 4 of them. And then I've got another list of 6 things which you are much more likely to be low on if you are vegetarian and vegan, but they're either not as well known or they're kind of a little bit more niche. So we'll cover the big ones first. So which anyone could have a deficiency in. So vitamin D3. So let's cover this one quickly first. I don't think I need to talk about the benefits. I think everyone's heard about it. We've talked about it before. So obviously, vitamin D3, primarily you would get it from sunlight, ideally, as we've talked about recently. Um, Now, honestly, if you're eating a carnivore diet, let's say, if you're only eating beef, then you also are likely to have D3 deficiency if you're not getting any sunlight. However, if you're omnivore, there are definitely some seafoods that do contain some vitamin D3. And so um, if, like, I think salmon is one of them, for instance.
Yeah, I was right. I was quite surprised when we did that episode. We're looking at the chronometer, how much vitamin D3 is in salmon.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you're only slightly more likely to not get enough from foods, but so there is some vitamin D2 in some plant foods, like mushrooms, for instance, can be fairly high in it if they have UVB light exposure, either from the sun or from lighting. So potentially mushrooms can have it, but basically, uh, if you're having a 100% plant-based diet, you're not getting any vitamin D3 specifically, which is the active form, the form that you specifically need. So you're really going to have to then either supplement it or get it from the sun. So whereas you're probably going to need to supplement it or get it from the sun if you're eating a quote unquote normal omnivorous diet, you're definitely going to need to supplement it or get it from the sun if you're eating a purely plant-based diet. So just wanted to, emphasize that. Next one. Magnesium. We've talked so much about magnesium. Loads of people talk about magnesium. Benefits pretty much everything, stress, anxiety, energy, sleep, muscle relaxation, it goes on and on and on. Required for over 1,000 different processes in the body. But uh, and anyone can be deficient in magnesium from their diet, as again we've talked about in recent episodes. But it is more common with a plant-based diet, I have seen. Now, for all the vegetarians and vegans screaming, there are some plant foods that are high in magnesium. Yes, I'm aware of that. But what I'm saying to you is when I actually see what actual people eat, some of the people who are omnivorous and especially who eat a lot of red meat or oily fish, as we talked about earlier, they are actually getting or close to getting enough magnesium from food. With the actual plant-based diets that I actually see in real life, people are usually very far away from it, getting enough magnesium from food. And so um, just be aware of that. Use an app like Chronometer that we've shown you many times before and check to see if you're actually meeting your magnesium requirements. In that case, that's probably the best strategy rather than testing, because the normal blood test that your doctor does of magnesium is not in any way helpful because it only tells you what's in your blood, which your body keeps under strict control in anything other than a medical emergency, which is why they're testing it, just to see if there's an emergency around it. But it doesn't tell you how good your reserves are of it. So that's not helping. So doing chronometer is a good way of seeing if you're just meeting at least that amount. And remember, the more stress you have, the more magnesium you're going to eat. The less sleep you have, the more magnesium you're going to need. The more energy output you have, the more busy you are, the more energy magnesium you're going to need. So most people need more than that RDA to be optimal, but most people are not even getting the RDA from food. So that's why magnesium is usually in the top three. Everyone should just take it supplement categories. And as I said, a lot of meat eaters don't get enough, but if you're a vegetarian or vegan, you almost certainly don't. So there's that one. Another one that I've talked about a lot is vitamin B1, also known as thiamine. So it's similar to magnesium, and in fact, you shouldn't have really high doses of one without the other. They work together in the energy production process. And so vitamin B1, I guess it's the energy nutrient more than anything, but generally the B vitamins you could think of them as being energy and like your body turning food into energy, and you can think of them in terms of the nervous system, like your brain and all the rest of it functioning correctly. And B1 is no exception to that. B1 is so important for the nervous system that large doses of B1 are my number one favorite remedy for neuropathy. So neuropathy is
Well,
also
that's a really good point. I'm glad you said that, because especially people that have been on certain treatments that we won't really go into detail on, they definitely walk away with a lot of neuropathy. So that's nice to know that supplementing with B1 can be of assistance.
Yes, in that case, it's especially a specific type called benfotiamine, which is a fat-soluble form of B1 that's the most effective. But any B1 is definitely better than nothing. And so neuropathy, this is the point I was going to make. Neuropathy just means neuro means nervous system, and pathy just means disease. So neuropathy just means disease of the nervous system. And so the fact that a large dose of B1 can often um, make a significant benefit with neuropathy, often very quickly, shows that lack of B1 very quickly creates a disease in the nervous system. It's such a huge factor. And again, similar to magnesium, it is depleted by stress. It is actually depleted by carbohydrates. So the more carbohydrates you eat, not that I'm saying you shouldn't, but the more you eat, the more B1 that you need to go along with them. It's depleted by toxic exposure. It's depleted by all the usual stuff. It's even depleted by sunlight exposure, for instance, which is why people who are in the borderline of severe deficiency like beriberi will often trigger beriberi once the sun comes back out again. They start getting sunlight exposure. Um, but the most severe cases of B1 deficiency these days are usually alcoholics. And so it's alcohol really depletes it. And so it's not uncommon for alcoholics to get B1 injections, like at a doctor, to help them to prevent, more serious disease. So B1 is a big deal. And deficiency is not that uncommon. It's very hard to get it from food in general, both again plant and animal. But again, which is why I mentioned it, it's even easier to get deficiency of it from only plant foods. Certain plant foods are high. Some of the nuts specifically, I think macadamia nuts, for instance, are very high. Perhaps almonds, stuff like that. But when I say pretty high, I mean like if you eat an amount of nuts that would make most people feel unwell, you might just reach the RDA of vitamin B1. It's not, to be honest, you need quite a lot of animal foods as well to reach it, but generally 500 grams of like pork or beef over a day is kind of doable, whereas 500 grams of macadamia nuts or almonds is not, like just for a person's digestive system. So that's a challenge. So with B1, I mention it because it's specifically a big one, but generally the vast majority of people, vegetarian or not, do well with like a B complex. Perhaps a low dose B complex, because if you have a very high dose B complex, it can kind of create detoxification effects that may make you feel worse and all the rest of it. So that's case by case. If you're if you know you're very low in B vitamins, which often my clients are, because I get them to actually test, then we get them on high doses. But perhaps if you're just starting, that wouldn't be where you go. You would just have a low dose B complex just to make sure you're hitting a reasonable amount of all those nutrients without maybe starting some other detox process or something that you don't really need to be going through. So, and on that subject, so B1 is one, biotin is another one. I'm going to talk about biotin soon in a different episode again. But biotin is vitamin B7. It again is essential for the energy production process. It again is hard to get an optimal amount from food in general, but and like chronometer, I think biotin is one of the only things that it doesn't tell you for most foods, so you can't use chronometer for that one. I actually think there's an epidemic of biotin deficiency in general, so we're going to talk about that in a future episode, Chrissy.
Okay. Yeah, good.
There's lots of interesting research about insanely high doses being used in people, and there's claims of them getting better. There's at least claims of it like it not having any toxic effects, and like a why not try kind of thing. Um, and th- so the I think, was it chicken liver or something that was high dose. Beef liver even wasn't that high. It's very, very, very difficult to get a high dose of biotin from any natural foods, but it's even more difficult to get it from just plant-based foods. And so if you have some of the signs of low biotin, off the top of my head, hair, skin, and nails problems, hair starting to recede, yeah, like mine. Um, uh, Dry skin issues, cracks around the corner of the mouth, um, feeling tired all the time, hypersomnia, they call it, not just tired, sleepy all the time, insomnia, not being able to get to sleep, fatigue, because biotin is essential in the energy production process, So it's kind of typical, same as most of the B vitamins in terms of all the energy stuff, plus add in the skin and hair element, which is more specific to biotin. Um, that's probably the simple way of breaking it down. And so,
I was going to ask, so looking at this, and I know you've separated out B1 and B7 here. We talked about having a B complex. Would you then go to saying, okay, yeah, I have that B complex, but then also supplement extra B1 and B7?
I do, and I think many people, there's an argument to be made that it would make sense. But you may want to test, or you may want to consider it as an experiment to try it. Whereas when it comes to B complex, that's just something that would just make sense to keep taking, given, especially if you're a vegetarian, but probably just in general because of how stressful and demanding of energy life is these days. We talked about this, like boredom is a thing of the past. We never bored these days. Like we never have a kind of time where we're just shutting down, most of us, and not having much to do and not having much to think about and all the rest of it. So our energy demands always go, 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 and it just uses up B vitamins. So that's why B complex in general, yes, but specific cases where you might want to have even more B1, even more B2, even more B3, even more B5, B6, B7, B9, B12, yeah, all of them, yes. And so, it's kind of case by case. But as I said, with the B1, energy and nervous system function would be where I do see people doing experiments with high doses. It's usually for that reason. Whereas with B7, it's more like energy and hair, skin, nails kind of issue, where a person would want to do high doses.
Okay, and then what is a high dose?
Yeah. Okay. So I think the RDA of B1 is about 1 milligram. The supplements, often even just a normal B complex, may have as much as 100 milligrams in. That's completely safe and fine. Some people, when they're doing high dose, they're doing 500 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams, 2,000 milligrams, something like that. So way, way, way higher. Biotin. Biotin is crazy. So biotin is 30 micrograms, I believe, is the RDA. And it's not even easy to get that, just like with B1 from real food. In supplements, you usually say way more. It's like maybe 500 micrograms to 1,000 micrograms, so 1,000 micrograms is 1 milligram. You sometimes see biotin supplements like we actually have currently on the store that are 10,000 micrograms, and that's the dose often used for like hair, skin, and nails. But I have been playing with hundreds of milligrams, meaning hundreds of thousands of micrograms. I have not seen, as I said, any evidence that there is any toxicity at even that level. There are studies where people are being given doses of that level for months at a time with no signs of side effects. So there's no, as I talked about on the health news show, which by the way, I recommend everyone checks out. There's nowhere near enough studies into all these nutrients compared to what there should be, because it's all been co-opted by industries that are patentable, right? And these nutrients aren't patentable, so no one wants to spend money on them. Fine. That's where the government that's supposed to be looking after the common good should be doing it. They're not. They're doing the opposite. Okay, so there's hardly any studies on it, but the ones that are there show that even very high doses don't necessarily create a problem. And there are some studies showing that very high doses are really, really helping people. So, yeah, I'm not recommending anyone has as much as me, but I'm just answering your question, Chrissy.
No, absolutely,
The
yeah.
most I've done of B1 is, I think, 1.5 grams a day. And the most I've done of biotin is 250 milligrams in a day.
Wow. Okay. And because like for me as well as a minefield, I know we've got Feel Younger, which is in the States, but sometimes people may be like, oh, it's the shipping, or, there's other things. How does somebody make sure that they're getting, like, if they're going on it? And because I know we've talked about this in the past, and I know you prefer powders over capsules because there's other things that go inside stuff. What should somebody look for?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think that's kind of case by case. That might be a different episode. We can maybe do a guide on that. Yeah, let's do that separately because it is case by case.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know that's one of the things I love about Feel Younger, because I know you've gone through and make sure that everything is, you take them, all that. And that's why I was like, okay, no, I know it's safe and I trust it 100%. But if other people, maybe when they're looking around. So yeah, maybe if that's of interest to you, lovely listeners, put it in the comments below and maybe we'll do an episode on that. Okay. No,
Definitely. And I
yeah.
do like powders for that reason, but it's a taste challenge often. And sometimes it's a practicality thing, like a powdered zinc just isn't going to work. Like, so, and often with the B vitamins, um, you can get, yeah. So this is why I say it's case by case. I think it deserves a whole episode to go through what's the best form, like what's possible, where to get it, all that stuff. So back to the point of this. I want to go back to B1 for a second and say one of the other reasons I single out B1. So B1 deficiency, as I said, was very, very common not that long ago, 100-ish years ago. So common that there was epidemics of it. And because of that, they started fortifying food with it. But specifically what they started fortifying in most countries is, if they did at all, is wheat flour. So if you're a vegan or vegetarian and you're eating a load of wheat, you're probably getting just about the recommended daily amount, because you're eating fortified flour. But of course, a lot of people eating vegetarian, vegan diets are also eating a low gluten or no gluten diet. And so that is another reason why you might be B1 deficient specifically, not kind of actually caused by vegetarian and veganism, but caused by something that often goes with vegetarian and veganism, which is low levels of gluten, low levels of wheat flour.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. Okay. All right. Yeah, so that's something to look at as well. So these well-known nutrients, vitamin D3, magnesium, B1, B7. Would your recommendation be test before supplementing, or is it just something that everybody should supplement with?
Great question. With D3, yes. With the rest, no. Yes, if you're going to do crazy amounts that I just said I do, but taking, in the case of B1 or biotin, taking even 10 or 100 times the RDA is completely safe to just take on a long-term basis. And so you could just supplement with it. I always prefer testing because I like to know, again, just like I gave the example with zinc, I am an example of, like with biotin, where I was taking 100 times the recommended daily allowance, and then I got a test back saying that I was 9 out of 10 severely deficient in it, right? So I'm glad to know that. And I had a lot of the signs of the deficiency as well, like the hair falling out. So it's like, okay, I'll try more. Not just for the hair, but, so I was like, okay. And I doubt it's going to regrow hair, but, maybe if I replenish my stores, it will stop falling out. So yeah, like to take the crazy amounts with the other ones, definitely. With magnesium, it's hard to test for, like I said. So I would just supplement with it. I wouldn't go 10 or 100 times as much like the other two, but that's very difficult. You'd have to take handfuls of pills to do that. Just taking like a couple of pills of magnesium glycinate like we do in Feel Younger, or any kind of equivalent amount like that, is not excessive, meets your RDA, and then you're good.
Okay. So you mentioned the other category now, which is going to be the 6 things that you're much more likely to be low on, and a little bit more niche, and you might not recognize this. So why don't you start us off there?
So I have a mnemonic for remembering these, the 5 C's, I call them. And then we've got 1 T at the end. But let's start with the 5 C's. So the first one is calcium. So calcium, if you're a vegetarian and you're having plenty of dairy, do not worry about calcium. That's fine. The number one source of calcium is dairy. Now, there is also calcium in green leafy vegetables, significant amounts sometimes. There is also a significant amount of calcium in nuts and seeds, significant amounts sometimes. But the challenge with those, it's often bound up to other things like oxalic acid and phytic acid that make it hard for the body to digest. And in the case of oxalates, you could argue you don't even want the body to digest it, because if it does break that calcium oxalate apart, your body's then going to deal with the oxalates, which we just did an episode about recently as well. Um, so again, plant-based people might wrinkle at this like they do the protein, because it's like, technically I can get enough calcium from my diet. Um, but I'm more concerned with the fact that it's not easy to digest. I'm especially concerned about this with children, where calcium is more important to their growth. I I want to say this as unidentifiably as possible, but I knew someone who was a vegan, and they'd raised their child that their whole life, and their child had stunted growth, and they were, I don't know, definitely less than 5 foot anyway, even though genetically it was a tall family. And, they kind of recognize that. And you asked me a question a few episodes ago about how I knew someone who their genetics came from Southeast Asia, where everyone was short, but then they were adopted by a family in Holland, where everyone is tall, and they were growing like really rapidly. And I can't remember, this was explained to me when I was young, but there was something about how their bones are growing so rapidly, their skin couldn't keep up or something like that. Like, they were growing more rapidly than the genetics was really equipped for. And so what was that? I remember you asking me, and I think it is more the calcium than the amino acids, although it is both. And it's just Holland is one of the highest dairy diets in the world. That's the connection. So um, I think the calcium is significant, especially for growth. There are other aspects of it, like um, I think if I hadn't had a low calcium diet for so long, I would not have had the level of lead toxicity that I had, because they compete for absorption in the stomach, so in the intestines. So I think one of the reasons I ended up with such high levels of lead is not only because of intake, but because of lack of calcium. So again, and that's more of a big deal when you're a child. Obviously, you don't want any exposure to lead, but actually there's lead in kind of everything to some degree. And so having calcium helps to balance that out. Um, there's Ray Peat's whole school of thought that you want to have a good balance of calcium in relation to phosphorus. There's kind of phosphorus in every high protein food, pretty much, whether it's nuts and seeds, whether it's beans, whether it's meat. Like, almost every type of food has high protein food especially has high levels of phosphorus. Phosphorus is the acidic, really mineral nutrient, which is why, phosphoric acid, if you've heard of that, it's, pure acid. And calcium is the most alkaline of the minerals. So there's that whole, alkalizing movement, which was around a while ago. Um, and ironically, actually, and it's like eating a lot of greens and stuff like that. But then it's like, you got to get your protein from somewhere. And usually in the alkalizing movement, they're not keen on carbs either. So people end up eating a lot of, and they're not keen on animal foods. So they end up eating a lot of nuts and seeds. But nuts and seeds are like really high in phosphorus, even compared to calcium. And so I actually think it's it's more acidifying, ironically, when you eat that kind of diet. So I would actually consider supplementing calcium as a vegetarian, especially if you're growing, but possibly even if you're not. Um, and so I would. And calcium supplements used to be terrible. They were like calcium carbonate or calcium phosphate, which is just like ground up chalk that your body really struggles with. But these days there are commonly available supplements like calcium hydroxyapatite, which is the way that it's naturally found in teeth and in bones. And so it's your body's more able to actually utilize it. And so I would say, oh, and there's vegan versions as well. There's like a coral calcium. There's pearl-based calcium from actual pearls, like jewelry. That's part of Chinese medicine. Um, I think there's seaweed-based calcium supplements I've seen before. a seaweed is another high calcium food, so that is another natural form. So you can definitely get it naturally, but this was not about a supplement list, right? This is nutrients you need to be aware of. And so calcium is one of those ones that I would be aware of, especially if you're growing. Now, the other ones are more in a different category. I've got 3 amino acids and then one former B vitamin. So we'll do the former B vitamin first. So choline. So choline, I think, God, what was it? Vitamin B8, and then they decided it wasn't a B vitamin anymore. It wasn't a vitamin because, in order to qualify as a vitamin, your body must not be able to make it itself. And so that's why there's a few things that they originally classed as vitamins are like, actually, it's not a vitamin because your body can make its own. However, just because your body can make its own doesn't necessarily mean it's very good at making its own. And it doesn't mean it's necessarily making an optimal amount of its own. And so that's definitely the case with choline. And so I've talked about choline before, but a quick recap. Choline is essential for loads of things. Actually, every cell of your body utilizes choline. But what we usually think of it as a shorthand again is for liver health, because it is essential for making and keeping bile flowing, and it is and we think of it as um, nervous system health, specifically the brain and memory, because acetylcholine, which is among other things the memory molecule, is obviously built out of choline. It's choline plus an acetyl group, which is an acid. So I believe that my very low choline diet during that substantial period of vegetarian and veganism, like I talked about most of my life, plus the fact that I had a genetic variant that meant that my body was not very good at producing its own choline, and so needed 3 times as much choline as the average person does, or someone without that variant does, from diet, is what led to my liver problems and my severe pain digestive issue, which I've talked about in detail in other places. And so I wish I'd have known about this, and I wish I had been on top of choline. So if you are eating a vegetarian diet and you like eggs, you could be fine on choline if you're eating a lot of egg yolks. Egg yolks are high in choline. But otherwise, generally, well, including that, I guess, animal foods are high in choline and plant foods are not. And so, because it's something that an animal like you produces, it's not something that a plant produces. So, and that's true for all of the other nutrients I'm going to talk about from now on as well. They're all things that an animal produces. So the only way you can get them is to eat an animal or a product of an animal, like in the case of an egg. Everything, this is why I've done it in this order, Chrissy. Everything we've talked about so far is nutrients that, could be found in plants, or usually are found in plants. Everything I'm going to talk about now is basically not found in plants because an animal produces them. Now, zinc is found in plants, but zinc is much more abundant in animals, and true for various other things we've talked about. But yeah, these are exclusively, need an animal to make them. So choline's in that category. And so I think probably for that one, finding the genetic variant would be the crucial thing. Finding out if you have that SNP. If you don't have that variant, that means that you need more choline. Is it still worth supplementing in an ideal world? Yes, but it's not even, that cheap necessarily. Um, there is, so now, ironically, choline supplements are actually made from plants 100% of the time. So they're made usually from soy or sunflower. The amount in sunflower isn't that high compared to the amount of calories in sunflower, which is why usually the sunflower supplement is more expensive, because you need more of it to get it out. But if you eat a lot of sunflowers, you're probably meeting your choline needs just about. But then, it's a hell of a lot of omega-6 seed oil fats that your body's then going to deal with, right? As well as the various digestive issues a lot of people have with nuts and seeds. With soy, it's even worse, right? Soy is thyroid suppressing, goitrogenic, estrogenic, often GMO, one of the 6 most common allergens, on and on and on. There's all the reasons not to eat soy. I think we've talked about in more detail before. So yes, while it is plant sourced, the plant sources are things that I would not recommend that you eat. But if you are ignoring my advice and you are eating loads of tofu every day and all that kind of stuff because you think that's right, then you you might be getting a reasonable amount of choline, especially if you're eating actually. I'm not sure. Tofu might be right. It depends on the source. Like soy protein won't have any choline in, for instance, products made from soy protein. But if you're eating like the actual beans, what they call those green
Edamame.
beans. Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely going to have choline in because that's basically just a soybean cooked. So yeah, if you ignore my advice about avoiding soy and you eat loads of soy every day, then you don't need to supplement it. If you do not have the SNP, then you could probably that means that your body needs more. Then you could probably roll the dice on not supplementing it either and think, I'm probably getting enough ish. But if you have that genetic variant and then you're eating a low choline diet, it absolutely, in my experience, can create problems. And so, as I said, this is information I wish I'd have known. Literally years of agonizing pain I went through because of not knowing this. So, choline's a big deal to me. So, the other ones on the list are all amino acids. And so, none of them are considered to be essential amino acids because the definition of essential amino acid is your body can't make its own. There are essential amino acids, there are conditionally essential amino acids, and then there are non-essential amino acids. But we have to remember, even with the non-essential amino acids, what that means is your body won't die without them because it can make its own to some degree. That's all it means. It does not mean that you'll have optimal functioning without them. So I have left them till last because you could make an argument that they're least important for that reason. Because if you do not have enough of everything else I've talked about so far, it would be life-threatening. The evidence that that it's life-threatening if you don't have enough is very weak. But it's certainly optimal performance threatening if you do not have enough. And I think it's fairly common. So the first one, and it's one you've almost certainly heard of, and that's been talked about for a long time. It's actually one of the most well-researched supplements ever. It is very, very safe, and it has myriad health benefits. And yet, the only people who tend to take them as bodybuilders, and it's creatine. And so, it's actually a thing. I think recently was it an interview between Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, which I think was seen by over 100 million people, where they were discussing creatine and talking about the benefits that it has for energy throughout the day, the benefits that it has for focus and brain function and memory and stuff like that. It has mood benefits. Like, I'm happy that this is finally getting out because, yeah, creatine is a big deal. So, creatine, just like many other things that we've talked about, like B1 and magnesium and all the rest of it, is an essential part of the ATP production process. And your body can make its own, but it uses up a lot of your methylation capacity to make its own. And so, especially people who are under methylators, who do not have the ability to make their own methyl groups as easily, which is largely dependent on genetics. I'm kind of doing this quite quickly because we talked about it before in detail in other episodes. If you are that under methylator, which you may be, and again, this is where you want to have genetics check that. One of the most reliable blood markers for that is homocysteine. So if your homocysteine is high, and or if you have that genetic tendency, you could test in either of those ways. Then what that means is, yes, you want to support your body's methylation with the B vitamins. That's the usual advice. So B2, B6, B9, and B12. B2 and B9 is usually plentiful in plant food, especially B9 actually is mainly in plant food. B6 is okay. B12 we've talked about. So there's that. But then also, most of your body's methylation capacity goes to making choline and creatine. And so for those who are struggling to methylate, and it's much more common to under-methylate than over-methylate, although both are possible. For those who are struggling, which is a lot of people, and homocysteine, by the way, if your homocysteine is high, that's a very accurate predictor of heart disease, Alzheimer's, stroke, all kinds of serious medical issues. So this is something that is worth checking. We've talked about it in many other episodes, which is why I didn't go on and on about it. This is something that's worth checking. And other than taking the B vitamins, which is usually what you're taught, taking the methyl donors, specifically choline and creatine, massively takes a burden off that methylation system, so it can then go through and do all the other stuff you want it to do, like stop your cells from aging or convert stress chemicals into their metabolites so that your adrenaline is not running sky high and, ruining your quality of life. These are all like, there are serious consequences to all this stuff. So I think that's at least one of the that's at least two of the reasons I've just given there as to why creatine has such widespread benefits that people are only now recently starting to become aware of. So number one that I just said is it's crucial for ATP production. Number two, I just said, is the methylation thing. So now, where is creatine found? It is found in muscle tissue specifically. It's one of the few nutrients that's actually not higher in organs, unlike most of the others that we've talked about. So um, if you do not eat animal flesh, if you do not eat animal muscle specifically, then you are getting a negligible amount of protein from diet. And so then there's a choice of, am I confident my body's making an optimal amount, or do I want to consider supplementing? And so, as I said, these used to be like a male who wants to put on muscle thing, which can also help with. Um, but I would say it's very, very helpful for older people. Dr. Miriam talked about that before, that one of the biggest risks if you manage to survive all the other pitfalls of aging is that you actually fall and break something, at which point often it's hard to recover from that once you're old. And so taking creatine really helps to maintain that muscle mass, so it can be useful on that level. But as I said, the impact on mood and energy is significant, and there's research especially that in women it really helps, especially with those issues like mood and energy. And so kind of every category of person has a different reason, I guess, why it's a good idea to take it. And as I said, if you're eating a pound or more of meat a day, I think, what is it? It's like a gram of creatine per pound of beef, something like that. It's off the top of my head. We can fact check that, but it's something like that. So a lot of people, when they're supplementing, they're having like 5 grams a day or more. Creatine, um, possibly, and this is contentious, may stress the kidneys if you have enough of it. I say it's contentious. Plenty of people say it doesn't. As I say, it's one of the most tested supplements in the world. It seems to be safe. What it definitely will do is it will make it look as if your kidneys are not functioning as well if you have enough of it. Because the way that they usually test kidney function is to test something called creatinine, which is just a metabolite of creatine. And so if you have loads of creatine every day, especially if you have it shortly before you do a blood test, your blood creatinine will look higher, or look like your kidneys are functioning worse than they are. I debated this with Dr. Miriam about whether this is, in any way valid. I think what Dr. Smith, who's been on here before, pointed out, which I think is valid, is that as much as there's been loads of studies on its safety, most of them are not very long. They're not like 10-year studies, 20-year studies. And so that would be an argument to me of either doing what some bodybuilders do of cycling on and off, or what I think makes more sense if you just want it for mood boosting purposes or whatever, just having less. So I would say a gram or two of creatine a day. Given that 5 to 10 grams is supposed to be totally safe, I would say 1 to 2 grams is definitely totally safe. And with that amount, it's more natural. Like you could get that if you were just eating a lot of meat, but you're not if you're obviously a vegetarian or vegan. So I'm a fan of just having a gram a day. And that, as a vegetarian or vegan, super cheap, super easily available, may well make you feel a hell of a lot better, depending on what you got going on with your methylation and ATP and other stuff. So yeah, I spent quite a long time on that one. I'll skip over these other two. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, but yeah, spending a lot of time, but it's like you said, it's unknown, and it could have massive benefits, especially when we know how important having our detox pathways running, methylation, everything like that. Because when we don't have enough and we're in that deficiency state, then our body does these backup systems, and then we just don't understand why we're not feeling so good. So something as simple as this could help significantly.
It could. And to go back to, I've kind of criticized the people who are like, I'm worried about you, you're not getting enough protein. So you can actually just translate that into, I'm worried about you, you're not getting enough creatine. Because that is a part of protein. It is a part of protein that is utterly absent in plant foods, as I've talked about. And maybe utterly isn't the right word, almost utterly, whatever. There's always some exception. But it's almost non-existent in plant foods. And so I think, and what's the unfair stereotype of the vegan, right? Like weak, listless, low energy or whatever, like maybe moody, does creatine have an impact on those things? Yeah, all of them, right? Whether it's muscle size, whether it's energy, whether it's mood. So again, if you don't want to hurt animals or you want to protect the environment or whatever it might be, I 100% respect that. Again, in the news show, I was talking about the horror of animal cruelty and the way that factory farming and all that is terrible. I 100% agree with that. So I do respect that. So just supplement it. As I said, it's one of the cheapest, easiest to get, safest supplements out there, as long as you're not going crazy on the dosage. Just supplement it, and then see, maybe it'll make you feel a lot better. So I'll just do these other ones more quickly. In fact, I'll do them all together. So then the last amino acid, so we've got 2 C's. I said there's 5 C's. So we've done calcium, choline, creatine. So let's add in carnosine and carnitine, and then we'll finish with taurine. And so carnosine and carnitine, as you could probably guess from the names, are again exclusively found in meat. So again, it's not even animal food. I'm pretty sure that they are, non-existent in eggs and dairy as well. We are really talking about flesh, dead animals. And so carnosine is a powerful antioxidant, which it's claimed will have a bunch of anti-aging kind of longevity functions potentially. It seems to have a protective effect on the DNA. Carnitine is a crucial part of the ATP production process. It's also quite popular again among men because it helps to improve androgen receptor sensitivity. So basically, it makes the testosterone floating around in your bloodstream more effective, have more of an impact. So often it's sold as L-carnitine for the more hormonal impact, and it's sold as acetyl L-carnitine or acetyl L-carnitine for the more energy and mood, etc. kind of impact. And so, as I said, I won't spend ages on those. Actually, to be honest, it's been ages since I researched them. But they have their own benefits. They're worth looking into if you're a vegetarian and vegan. And if you're like, I can identify with a lot of these signs of having low levels of them, maybe consider it, right? In the case of carnitine, it's not as cheap and easily available, but it's pretty close. It's still definitely not going to break the bank, and you don't need much. So you can get like, I don't know, half a kilo, a pound of powder, and I think even half a gram is plenty. So, that will last you 3 years for whatever, $20. So it's still not crazy. And then the carnosine is more expensive. That's, I don't know, I think that's maybe $30 for a bottle of pills that is like 2 months supply, something like that. So it's definitely a bit more. On the low end, you can certainly pay more for those kind of things. So something to consider. And then lastly, not a C, but I'll add it in, is taurine. So taurine has a few different functions. There's the DNA protection element, antioxidant element. It helps with that methylation thing that we just talked about. It potentially helps with mood. There's a lot of focus on it being an anti-aging nutrient that I see among the biohacking community. These guys love it. They're often talking about how it makes them feel so much better, mood-wise, energy, focus, happiness, stuff like that. It definitely interacts with GABA, which is the calming neurotransmitter. So I personally have never gone or enjoyed taurine as a supplement, but then again, when I looked at my test results, I have excessive levels of taurine apparently, so that would make sense. I don't need it. And so that's a thing where just because everyone's telling you, and I put carnitine and carnosine in that same category, just because everyone's telling you it's great or you're looking it up and it's saying it's great, it may not be for you. It's a bit more case by case. But the difference is a vegan or vegetarian will not make very high levels of carnitine or creatine or carnitine. I've seen vegetarians and vegans who do still have high levels of taurine. So whatever reason your body is able to make it on its own, because you're an animal. But again, if you happen to be low in it, there's no taurine in plant foods. So you're not going to get it from plant foods. So you're either going to get it because you eat an animal, or you're going to get it because you get it from a supplement. It's as simple as that. So again, I'd look into it, and this is something to try. I think taurine is in that very cheap category again. So these are things you can potentially try. By the way, if you have pets and you feed them like the kind of diet I recommended in the pet episode of just real meat, it's great also just to have a bag of taurine or a jar of taurine or something around and just sprinkle it on their food, because it's good for cats and dogs, but it's essential for cats. So whereas taurine is a non-essential amino acid for humans, technically, it is an essential amino acid for cats. And so often, if you buy packaged food, they'll have added it in. So if you have any cats, especially, which I know, a significant minority of you probably do, buy the taurine for your cats and then try a bit yourself and see if it agrees with you.
Oh, fantastic. So that's a great list. I mean, I love that you went into some of the well-knowns and then some of the not so well-knowns, because I love these episodes because then it makes me go like, ooh, those are things I need to check out or look into. Because I know even though this is meant to be just, more focused on vegetarians and vegans, but it's also a good reminder for all of us of, okay, where are our nutrients at? And just reminding us the importance of them, because we just forget. You just think, oh, I'm fine. But until you really start looking, it's just a good reminder.
Yeah. And it makes me think, I'm just looking at this list, like, is there anything here that I would say really don't worry about it if you eat loads of meat? And probably carnosine and carnitine from what I've seen. Um, Calcium if you have loads of dairy, like I said. But that's pretty much it. I mean, you do get quite a lot of zinc if you eat a lot of meat, but you might still not be getting enough, like I said earlier. So yeah, it's definitely not only for vegetarians and vegans, this list, but it is especially for vegetarians, vegans. But yeah, I would, if you're watching this because of someone that you care about, which I guess is how we pitched it, I'm glad, if you feel the same way as Chrissy, and like, maybe I need to look into some of this stuff for myself.
Well, Owen, thank you so much again for the comprehensive list. You've made me think, and I'm sure you've made some of our listeners, think as well. So before we close, are there any final thoughts?
Yeah, share with vegans specifically, right? I always say share, like and comment, and let's see if we can get this one trending in anything so that a bunch of vegans get to see it, and maybe we can actually help them. Like in the way that I wish I had been helped, right? I wish I'd have known this stuff. It would have literally saved me years of agonizing pain.
Well, and you make a very, very good point, because as we've stated so much before, and why it's, step 2 in the Rejuvenate blueprint, is that these nutrients matter greatly. And if you are going for such a long period of time where you're subpar, not optimal, things like that, it builds, as we can see with especially vitamin B12. I mean, that's quite intense, but this all adds up. It all adds up. It compounds over years and years and years. And as you say, it would have helped you a long time ago in the long run. Yeah. Well, thank you, lovely listeners, for joining us. As always, please remember to leave your comments below, ask us any questions, give us some suggestions, or just give us a smiley face or something. Just let us know how we're doing. And again, as always, please, we very, very much love it when you subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any episodes. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode. And one of the ones I'd recommend is just here, if you want to click there. Or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.